This is Take Flight with Mark Whittle.
I'm Mark Whittle, former city worker turned performance coach, and this is your place for inspiration and education on ways to optimize your performance. Thanks for choosing to take flight.
Dr. Demartini, what an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to the Take Flight podcast. It's an honor. Thank you.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to it.
Oh, likewise. Very much looking forward to it. And firstly, people wouldn't have seen this or heard this bit, but just before we started, you showed me the view outside of your window of your ship where the sun is setting over there. It's 3 p.m. in the afternoon for me in the UK, but did you say it's 6 p.m. with you?
Yep, 6 p.m.
Yeah, and just such a fascinating lifestyle. So you live on the ship, right?
Yeah, I've been living on, I travel. Sometimes I get off and I travel and go speaking, obviously, but I've been living on a ship for 21 years.
So John, look, I always like to start this around a similar kind of place. I'm a coach myself, and look, I really admire you. I've looked up to you. You've been a mentor to me without you knowing it through reading your material and working through that. And I love using the values work and so much more that you've done with my clients as well. And as you know, as a part of that, I love to start with my clients around what happened in their childhood and understanding a little bit more about the things they did have and didn't have, which led to some of the values and behaviors they've got today. So I'd love to ask that question to you. You know, what do we need to understand about your childhood, which has led to the person that you've become and the person that we know of today?
Well, I had a bit of a challenge when I was young. I had learning difficulties, dyslexia and difficult. I couldn't read. I was born with my hand and leg turned in. And so when I tried to write, I wrote backwards. And I didn't get any meaning out of class at learning words. And so I didn't read until I was really 18 years old. And I dropped out of school and I was a street kid from 13 to about 18. And yeah, I had a bit of challenge on that. It was an adventure, so I can't really complain too much. It was a few close calls with life, but a pretty good adventure. Led me to the field of surfing. So when I was 13, I went to the beach in Texas. That wasn't the surf capital. At 14, I hitchhiked out to California and went down into Mexico and Central America. At 15, I made it over to Hawaii. And I just wanted to ride big waves. I wasn't going to make it in school. I might as well do something that I really love doing, which is surfing. And then I nearly died at 17. And that led me to a health food store to recover and then a yoga class to recover. And I met Paul C. Bragg. And Paul C. Bragg one night in one little recreation hall on the North Shore of Oahu shared a message with me that made me believe that maybe I could overcome my learning problems and get through and someday become intelligent. I never thought I was going to be, learn how to read and become intelligent, but I could make surfboards and I could surf. But that night was the first night I thought maybe I could overcome this and learn how to read and properly write and spell and speak properly, because I had a speech impediment since I was 1.5. And so then my whole trajectory changed the night I met this man. And I saw a vision of me standing in front of a group of people and speaking, which is painted and sits in my office today, a big 5 by 4 foot painting of standing in front of 1 million people with an iconic building from every major city around the world. It's the message. It's a man with a message and a vision. That's the name of the painting. And it was a dream to overcome the learning problems, overcome the speaking problems, and be able to share and teach. Now I've been blessed to speak. It's about to be 193 countries in about a day and a half. So 193 countries.
Wow.
So I had to first learn how to read a dictionary and properly spell. I used to practice 30 words a day with the help of my mom to pronounce, spell, and use the meaning of a word. And we memorized it. Took quite a day to get 30 words a day until I grew my vocabulary about 20,000 words. And that allowed me to start to go back to school and eventually excel. Now, the thing they told me I would never do, my teacher told me in first grade I'd never be able to read, write, or communicate effectively. Today, I've read 30,700 and something books. I've spoken 300 and something times a year for many, many years. I've reached millions of people, billions of people, in fact. So the very thing you're told you never can do might just be the thing you can do. Turned out to be, in my case, a lot of work. I put a lot of effort into it, but I can't think of anything else I'd rather be doing. So I do it 7 days a week.
Incredible. I'm so glad that you do as well. It's been such a huge help to me. So thank you for that. There's so many things I want to ask you about that. The first one that really, really touched me is because I think I had a similar experience. What does your mum mean to you, and how important was it that she gave you that support and helped you during that time?
Well, my mom was an artist. My dad was the engineer, the left and right brain kind of family. And she was a mystic. I think what happened to me when I was 18 years old, when I tried to go back to school, I took a GED and guessed and somehow passed that thing. So I thought, okay, I'll try some school. And I got a 27 on my first class test. And everybody else was above 75. And there I was down at the bottom. And I thought, whoa. And I remember crying and running to my car thinking, repeating what my first grade teacher said to me. She said in front of my parents, she says, I'm afraid your son will never be able to read or write or communicate effectively. And I remembered that. And that's what went through my head, that when I failed that test, I go, wow, if I couldn't even get a 27, maybe this is a fantasy that I'm going to overcome this. And I was really having a rough moment. I was crying in the living room under this little Bible stand, that my mom had. And she came home from shopping and she saw me laying on the floor there crying. And she said, my God, what happened, son? And I said, I failed the test. I guess I don't have what it takes. I guess I'll never be able to read, write, and communicate. And I felt apologetic to her because I felt like, they were helping me to try to pay for the school. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was to help me go back to school and try to get a GED and try to, in case I ever needed a job or something. She came up to me and she put her hand on my shoulders and she said, son, whether you become a great teacher and travel the world like you dream, and step foot on all these countries that you dream about, because I told her my dream that I saw that night when I was with Paul Bragg, or you return to Hawaii and ride giant waves like you've done. And I got the opportunity to be in books and magazines and even movies, 3 movies when I was in surfing. Or you return to the streets and panhandle as a bum, which I also did, because I did panhandling and, hung out on the streets, slept on the streets. She says, regardless of what you do, your father and I are going to love you no matter what. And I don't think too many people could say that other than a mom. It's just a special moment. And when she said that, my hand went into a fist, kind of this determination feeling. And I looked up and I saw that vision standing on a balcony in front of 1 million people speaking, which I could show you the painting of it. I think I've got it here, actually.
Wow. It's amazing.
Whether I travel the world and speak, she said, but I'm a hand went into a fist and I saw that vision. And I said to myself, I'm going to master this thing called reading, studying, and learning. I'm going to master this thing called speaking and teaching. And I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to travel whatever distance. I'm going to pay whatever price to give my service of love across this planet. And I'm not going to let any human being on the face of the earth stop me, not even myself. And I got up and I hugged my mom and I went in the room and I got my Funkin' Wagnalls dictionary out. If you bought $20 worth of Kroger groceries, you got a volume of a dictionary or an encyclopedia in those days. And I decided I was going to memorize that dictionary from start to finish and 30 words a day. And I just chunked it down into small little bites. And before I would go to bed, my mom would test me on those words and I had to be able to spell them, pronounce them, explain the meaning, and put it in a sentence. And I would spend a long time doing that to get that ready because that was not easy. But if you do 20 words a day, in a couple of years, you got 20,000 words. And that was more than most people had in their vocabulary. And I started reading dictionaries, encyclopedias. I read 8 complete multi-volume sets of encyclopedias over the next couple of years and just spent my day 24 hours a day, 20 hours a day to sometimes longer reading. And that was a great, I've never stopped my reading. I read every day.
Is there a word or a lesson or a story or something you learned from that period of reading all the dictionaries and the encyclopedias that kind of sums up that feeling for you of what you went through?
That when you discover you can learn and read, it's amazing. Because now you can stand on the shoulders of giants. Now you can take a life's work and condense it, particularly as you get faster in reading. In a short period of time, you can take a vast amount of knowledge out of one individual and then stand on that. That's amazing when you stop and think about the impact that is. So you're basically taking history and putting into your mind and expanding it. At the time, Paul Bragg, the guy that inspired me, mentioned the word universal laws. I didn't know what that meant, frankly, but I understood a law was something you didn't break. And I understood universal seemed like the whole big thing, the big honcho. And so I went and looked up what is a universal law, and it led me to natural laws, led me to Aristotle, and then it led me to a logos, the natural reason and the great word that religious theologians perceived that permeated the universe and gave order to the universe. And so I studied, well, what exactly is this logos? And that led me to the ologies, right? Geology, mineralogy, all the ologies and disciplines. So I made a list of all the known disciplines and ologies I could find in the dictionary and encyclopedia. And there's a lot of them. And then I thought, okay, in order to get a degree, a PhD in each of those areas, what would be entailed? And I figured if I read 100 books on each of those 100 textbooks or 100 books on those ologies, on each of those ologies, then I would be able to extract and distill the most universal knowledge, the most consistent principles that were found in all of them to build a body of work on that I could build so I could teach. So I would have something of substance to teach and not just, repeat and parrot what I've been told that is usually subjectively biased. I wanted to get a body of knowledge that was a synthesis. And so I started setting out to do that and studying it. And I became polymathic, an autodidactic polymathic individual, studying all the disciplines. And I learned that the faster I shared the knowledge and wrote the knowledge of what I was extracting in that, the faster my brain was absorbing it, using it, and retaining it. So I started writing on all those disciplines and speaking about all those disciplines so I could engulf those and inculcate those and be able to disseminate that the best I could. And that was inspiring because my dyslexic and my speech impediment really gradually, slowly, over many years, decades, gradually became fluent. So, but I learned what was the thing. I realized that my subordination to outer authorities and my intimidation to outer authorities was part of the dyslexia. And once I found out that whatever I perceived in anybody who was a giant, and I looked within myself and reflected and discovered where I had that in my own form until it was equivalent quantitatively and qualitatively, I noticed that all of a sudden my speech was fluent, that my subordination and my anxiety of interaction with somebody who I was subordinate to and minimizing myself to was part of that condition. And so once I got to stand on their shoulders and reflective awareness, I liberated myself from some of the impediments. And I've now helped other people do the same. It's really quite inspiring.
You're saying that the fear was coming from looking at other people as more than?
Well, when I was told I would never read, write, or communicate, and then I dropped out of school, anybody that was relatively intelligent, you assumed they were above you and you kind of minimized yourself. And in the way human values work, anytime you minimize yourself to somebody, you'll tend to inject some of their values. You'll tend to envy them and try to imitate them, and you'll lose your own identity trying to be somebody you're not. You'll be second at being somebody else instead of first at being you. And you'll be clouded by the injected values instead of clear about your own mission. So I realized that whenever I saw somebody that I admired and looked up to ask this question: what specific trait, action, or inaction do I perceive this individual displaying or demonstrating that I admire most? And then I go inside myself and introspect and reflect. Okay, go inside me, and where do I display or demonstrate the same specific trait, action, or inaction? And where else? And who do I demonstrate it to? Where is it? When was it? Who do I do it to? And who perceives me that way? And then what I do is I lift myself up and level the playing field. And as I do, my brain works differently. And I watched it, and I studied the brain and how it worked and how we neuroplastically developed the brain that way. I wrote about that when I was 23, about how we could change the brain. And I was fascinated by the capacity we have. Because a lot of these illnesses, these so-called praxias and aphasias and dyslexias and all those, a lot of those are simply, while we're in the womb or in the early stages of our life, not knowingly a result of comparisons to other people and the confusion of injections or projections. Because I've helped people with it, and I've watched this disappear. It takes work, but I can speak fluently today with a high degree of clarity today compared to I can see it decade by decade. You can see the change and listen to the audios and the videos, and you can see it. Watch the transformation. But once I learned that tool, I watched it accelerate and dissolve away. So that was insightful. And I'm grateful for all the people that I thought had something that I didn't. I realized at the level of the essence of the soul, nothing's missing in us. But the level of the existence of the senses, things appear to be missing in us. And the things that appear to be missing in us are all the things that we are too proud or too humble to admit we have. And once we realize and level the playing field and take out the imposters and facades and personas and masks that we wear of being greater or lesser than somebody, and just level the playing field and have reflective awareness and see that the seer, the seeing, and the seen are the same, and we realize that there's nothing but love there, our physiology coordinates itself and integrates itself, and the medial prefrontal cortex organizes and calms down the impulses and instincts of the subjective mind, and we become objective and clear and very profoundly impactful.
Powerful. Just before we go any deeper, because this is so incredible, I feel it's quite surreal listening to you speaking to me about it, having read all your material. But before we go any further, for people who are listening, can we just add some context around values and people who might not have read your work, like, kind of get into how do we identify our values and your 13 questions that will then layer some context to some of the things we talk about afterwards?
I first got interested. I've been teaching now over 50 years now, so I broke my half a century. But about 45 years ago, I came to a realization that our values are what decide our perception, decisions, and actions, therefore the foundation of human behavior and all of drive, intrinsic or extrinsic. So I started looking at what values were. And most of the time, if you go and explore axiology, which is the study of value and worth in human behavior, you'll see morals and ethics, which wasn't really what I was interested in. Not that that doesn't have a place in mass consciousness, but I wanted to know what drives an individual, not because of some duty, but because of intrinsic design. And I kept noticing that most of the literature on human values was how you should be. They were more into the way you got to be, have to be, must, should, ought to, and supposed to, or need to be, which are imperatives by outer authorities, by usually religious or politically sourced individuals. So I wasn't satisfied with that because I didn't want to live by subordination to outer authorities, as I had already learned. I wanted to live intrinsically. And so I had to find a way of discerning human values without the cloudedness of the injected values that people lived in. Because if you ask people what their values are, they'll tell you peace and harmony and integrity and all this social idealisms. But that's not what their life demonstrates. I want to know what your life is demonstrating, because that's really what you're up to. So your life demonstrates your values. Your words can be forked tongues. They can speak all kinds of things, but what does your life demonstrate? Where's the congruency and the integrity of yourself? That's where I'm interested, if you're going to master your life. So I started to compile the more objective way of discerning what is your values. And I found space was a very, very strong one. There's a thing called proxemics, as you probably already know. And proxemics has an intimate space, which is about 1.5 feet around you. Then it's personal space or individual space, which is about 4 feet. Then you got social space, which is about 10 to 12 feet. And then you got public space. And anything that's proximal and close to you, your arm into your body, your torso, is important to you. You keep it close to you. Anything that's not, you push away, distal. The greater the distance, the less valuable it is, the closer it is to you. So the most intimate things are important to you. So I ask people, what is it that you fill your intimate and personal space with that you can get within 4 feet of reach that is most consistently sensed or acted upon in your personal space where you spend the most time in your life? So at work or at home, what are the 3 items that you fill your space with? Because that gives you an indication of what's important to you. For instance, my case, my computer is 1.5 feet away from me. And I'm in front of it sometimes 20 hours a day. And as a result of researching, writing, or teaching, or podcast or something. So if I look at what's the dominant use of this item, it's mainly for teaching. And if I look at the second most dominant use, it's researching and writing, because I do this simultaneously. But what is that purpose of that researching and writing? It's for teaching. So I look at what exactly is that item and what's its utility. Teaching stands at the top. Learning and researching and writing is right underneath it, just that item. Then I look at the second most consistent item. It's the phone. And if I look honestly at what my phone is, because that's within 1.5 feet of me, I don't do a lot of calls. I have a girlfriend, I have my kids, and I have a director, and that's about it. I don't have anybody. No, I don't use telephone calls. But what I do is if I do go to have breakfast, lunch, or dinner, if I'm walking around, I can research with this. So I'll go on and I'll be researching. So the dominant use of this is learning. And then right underneath this thing, I've got encyclopedias. So I still read encyclopedias and just refresh myself on quality literature. I feed my mind every day with that. That's just something I do. So there's books. So what's the purpose of that? Researching. Well, what's the research for? I don't research for just pleasure, for whatever is just, it's not random. It's very precise information that I'm going to use for teaching. So if I look at my space, it indicates what's really priority to me. And that is disseminating information that can help people master their lives and expand their awareness potential and live an extraordinary, inspired life, amazing life. So that's what I love doing since I was 17, 18. That's been my dream. And my life demonstrates that. It's very, I can say sometimes 18, 20 hours a day. So that's a consistent thing. So I look at space. Then I look at time. Because you make time, find time, and spend time on things that are important to you, and you come and run out of time for things that don't, even though you don't want to admit it. So if I look at how many hours, I just finished a 4-day program of 12-hour-a-day presentations just this morning, early this morning. So if I look honestly at what I'm doing with my time, if I take 24 hours a day times 7 days a week, and look at how many hours out of that time I'm actually doing something, mine off the chart is teaching. The second most use of the time is researching and writing, because I write a lot of books. And I'm reading and writing and constantly. I've got 3 going right now. So, and if I look at the third, is traveling, because I'm full-time traveling. I'm either flying or I'm sailing. I'm nonstop sailing. I've traveled over 20 million miles of flying. And I don't even know how many thousands of miles sailing, because I've been doing it for decades now. So I'm traveling because I want to travel the world and step foot in every country on the face of the earth and teach and learn and teach. That's what I dreamed of doing when I was 17. So if I look at my life, well, space shows that, time shows that. So your space and time are two quality indicators of what's really important to you if you are honest about the answers. Because what people do, you ask them about how much, what do they do, spend their time on, they'll tell you what they think it should be, what they want it to be, what they think it ought to be, instead of what it is. And you want to take a drone and hover over you and look down on you and video you and look at what's true and give an honest, objective view if you want to know what's really important to you. So space and time are two. The third one is energy. Whenever you're doing something that's high in your energy goes up automatically. I always have energy for teaching. Even if I didn't, I've been up 48 hours nonstop and still doing 12-hour programs. When you're doing something you absolutely love to do, you don't think about it. You don't take breaks. I've known to go, hours and never take a break because you don't think about breaks because you don't want to escape something you're engaged and inspired by. You want to stay engaged in it. I've done 7 hours straight and people go, we can have dinner tonight? And go, what time is it? I thought it's 2:00. No, it's 9:00. You're engaged in something, you become so present, you extract out space and time from the mind and become present, and you don't notice the chronology. You're not in the world of time. The arrow of time and entropy doesn't occur. You're not enterprising and aging. You're just present. And so when you're really engaged in what's really inspiring to you, you extract out space and time from the mind and you become present. The third one is the energy. So what is it that energizes you and what is it that you always have energy for? And what is it that if you start to engage in it, you just come alive? I'm sure you've had it it's maybe 12 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock or something like that. You're ready to go to bed and all of a sudden you read something, oh man, and you get so engaged in it, you don't want to stop. Or you're
last week,
forget about time, That's because you're highly engaged in something that's really valuable to you. So the third one is energy. The fourth one is money. You make money, find money, and spend money according to your values. And the hierarchy of your values dictates your financial destiny. Tell me what you value most, I'll tell you where your money's going. Value second, that's where it's going second. So you look at where is most of your money going. Well, when I was in my 20s, I was paying for professional school, which is $4,700 a semester, which is 1978. And I was buying 40 and 70 books a week on average. So I was going to bookstores and buying 40 to 70 books because I was reading, 7, 8 books a day sometimes. And so I was spending my time. So my money was going to education, going to books, and my apartment where I was teaching every night. I taught classes 7 nights a week. So whatever I'd read in the morning, early in the morning, I would teach at night. And I looked at my money and that's where it goes. When I got out of school and got into practice, there was an adjustment there. But I started teaching each night and most of my money went back into my practice of teaching people in the health area. And then investments came up. So I started investing and paying for homes for a family. So your values, based on what is priority to you, you spend your money accordingly. And you'll find that each of these questions, when answered objectively and honestly, will create a beautiful pattern that you won't be able to miss if you really are honest. And it'll go, it's pretty obvious what my life is demonstrating. It's really important to me. And a lot of times it's not what you imagine. You think you know yourself, but a lot of people don't. If I ask people in front of a big, 5,000 or 6,000 people or something, how many of you want to be financially independent? Everybody will put their hand up. I said, how many are now financially independent? All the hands go down. So they all fantasize about it, but the second they get money, how they spend it tells me that they're buying consumables that depreciate in value instead of buying assets that appreciate. So they don't really want financial independence. They want immediate gratification to live the lifestyles of rich and famous and live beyond their means and live vicariously through other people's brands instead of building a brand that builds a fortune. So their life demonstrates one, but their words say another. And I don't go by people's words. I go by what their life actually demonstrates. And so those first four are four. The fifth one is, where do you have the greatest degree of order and organization? The sixth one is, where do you have the most discipline, that you're totally disciplined, you're totally reliable to do it. You can count on them to be doing that. You can count on me to be teaching. You can't count on me to be cooking. I haven't cooked since I was 24. You can't count on me to be driving. I haven't driven a car in 33 years. I've had chauffeurs. I've delegated everything but what I'm inspired to do. Teach, research, write, and travel. That's it. I got a clock changer. I got a bed changer. I got a cleaning group. I got a pilot. I got a concierge. I have everybody that takes care of everything other than what I love doing, which is teach, research, write, travel. Everything else. And my girlfriend says, my wife passed away. My girlfriend says, you delegate everything. And says, why don't you delegate me George Clooney and Brad Pitt to take care of the sex for you? I said, I'll call Hugh Jackman and I'll see if I can get Debbie to let this happen. That's a joke. My girlfriend would
it's
that. And I personally, if I showed you her, you would not want me to delegate that. She's pretty hot. But anyway, the point is, I learned if you're doing high priority things, your life becomes inspiring and your self-worth goes up and the world reflects that. And if you do low priority things, you weigh yourself down gravitationally, not radiationally, and you lower your self-worth and the world reflects that. So prioritizing your life and filling your day with high priority actions that inspire you instead of allowing the external world to impose on you all of the values that they think, and being frightened of being rejected and frightened of not fitting in, which holds you back from some absolutely original contribution to the planet that makes a difference. So I prioritize my life. And so the next one is, what do you think about how you would love your life that shows evidence coming true? What your innermost dominant thought becomes your outermost tangible reality. What are you thinking about how you would love your life? I think about traveling the world, stepping foot in every country and teaching. It's what shows evidence. It's what I would love to do. Next one is, what are you visualizing about how you would love your life that shows evidence coming true? Next one is, what are you internally dialoguing with yourself about how you would love your life that shows evidence coming true? Because one's the frontal and parietal cortex, one's the occipital cortex, visual, and one's the temporal cortex. And you're gestalt if you're integrated and you're congruent. So I'm making sure that all those are congruent and saying the same message. The next one is, what do you externally converse with other people about spontaneously? And whenever you talk about it, you get engaged and you forget time. What do you want to bring it? Because people come up to you and say, how's your kids? And how's your investments? And how's your business? And how's your health? And how's your golf? What do you keep wanting to talk about? And lead the conversations unconsciously too. And it'll be the same thing. Mine's obviously my teaching and what I'm doing, traveling. The next one is, what inspires you? What opens your heart, brings a tear of gratitude, a chill up the spine, where you know that that's on track, that moment of inspiration. And what's common to the people who are inspiring you? All the great Nobel Prize winners, I've read them all. All of the great philosophers of West and Eastern mysticism, read them all. All of them have inspired me. Anybody that's contributed original thoughts into the planet, that's made some sort of contribution in original thinking and created technologies that change the world. Man, I love devouring anything about them, the stories and how they came to those conclusions. So those are what inspire, and that's an indication, again, of the values. The next one is, what do you have that's the most consistent, persistent goals that you have been consistently focusing on showing evidence of true? They're long-term goals that you have been relentless in the pursuit of, and that let nothing stop you from achieving them. And the very last one is, what do you spontaneously want to read about, study about, learn about, watch on YouTube, and want to engulf and imbibe and partake of? Because we spontaneously want to learn of what's most important to us. Our epistemological pursuit is an expression of our highest value. Our teleological purpose is an expression of our highest values. Our ontological being and identity is an expression of our highest value. So if you know yourself and be yourself, you're going to end up loving yourself and do something contributive. But those are the 13 indicators that I found are more valuable than most of the fluffy stuff that's out there on about values and how you should be and all that. I'm not interested in any of that. So I had to write my own stuff on that.
Thank you, John. Thanks so much for taking us through that. And for people who've never heard that before, it's going to be mind altering. I think the biggest challenge with that when you're answering those questions, and I know you've got stuff on your website, Dr. Demartini, as well, so people can go there and it's a free resource to answer them and work through them. But the biggest challenge is when you spoke about that honesty piece. So, and selfish question for me as well. How do you break through that unconscious layer of someone's, I suppose, if you to use your phrase, the social idealism? Like, how do you break through that false perception of what they think they value?
Yeah, I just did a values training program for the last 4 days, and training people on making those distinctions to get past their BS. And there was a lady that tried to pull one on us, and I showed the team how to get past their BS, because the pattern that will be revealed, if there's an honest pattern, you'll know that the pattern is clear. It'll point to the same direction. If you ask and answer those questions 3 times each, 3 answers for each, you'll have 39 questions, and there will be a pattern and it will repeat if you're honest. If there's jumbled stuff up there, then there's obviously injected values there. So most people, if they do it on their own, they don't have somebody guiding them through and catching those things. I just say, do it again a week from now, do it again a month from now, do it again a quarter from now, and from each quarter, and store them on the computer, because on my website it's free and they can do it, and it just stays it and it keeps it there, and they can watch the truth about themselves. And each time they do it, they will become more integral on that answer, and they'll see the pattern. But some people can do it right off the bat. I would say probably a small percentage just nail it the first time. But they get close, but they have to narrow it down further. You don't just say business. People say, well, my highest value is business. No, it isn't. My business has 1,000 different items that need to be done with a lot of people doing different things. The part I have about business is teach, research, write, travel. That's my business job description. I don't do administration. I don't do hiring and management and all that stuff. I've hired specialists to do those things to liberate me to do what is most inspiring, most productive, and most meaningful. If you're not doing what's most meaningful, inspiring, and productive, you're holding your business back. So, because my skills are not in those areas, my skill is in learning and disseminating. So you have to give yourself permission to prioritize once you learn what these are, and structure your life and navigate. That's what I do. I teach people how to do that so they can live an inspired life. You're not going to live an inspired life unless you're doing the highest priority things and delegating the rest. Anything that requires an extrinsic motivation that you procrastinate, hesitate, and frustrate on, if it's not delegated, you're weighing down. So you want to delegate anything that requires a reminder, an incentive, or a motivation extrinsically to get you to do it, or you're going to be distracted by impulses and instincts, rewards and punishments of the amygdala instead of living in the executive function. So I'm a firm believer in prioritization and delegation. And my life, I started that at 27, and I never went back. I learned what that did. It scaled up my business in 18 months, tenfold, just by learning that art.
John, what do we do in the gap between recognizing and building awareness around the things we don't want to do and having the resource to either pay for people for these tasks to be delegated to, or find the right people? What do we do in that gap?
Well, that's a great question I get very frequently. And people think, well, that's great. You're multiply timed financially independent. You can do that. No, that's exactly. I didn't start out that way. When I was 27 years old, I didn't have wealth. I had debt. I was way more in debt than I was in wealth. But I realized that the moment you do, that's when you become wealthy. Most people think when they get wealthy, then they can do it. But you get wealthy by doing it, and you won't get wealthy till you do it. Because you can't get wealthy doing something that's uninspiring, and doing it all yourself, you'll hold yourself back. You limit your capacities. So the key is making sure that you surround yourself with people that are more inspired and more congruently doing the things you want to delegate. And so it's the hiring process, because nobody goes to work for the sake of a company. They go to work to fulfill their values. And if you ever hire somebody that's beneath you because you need your ego boosted, you're automatically going to weigh yourself down, and it's not going to work. And you're going to get the symptoms to let you know that you're not being authentic. They're not being authentic. And all symptoms of any business is nothing more than a feedback to let people know that they're not being authentic. And the symptoms of the business are trying to get everybody to be not square pegs and round holes. So when you hire somebody, what I do is I find out, I do the value determination process, and then I take the job description and I ask them how specifically is doing this job going to help you fulfill your highest values. And if there's any incongruency, they'll go, they'll look. There's no fluency. The speed in which they can answer that tells me the fluency in which they have a connection in the brain, and it's neuroplastically wired through Hebb's law. So if all of a sudden they can't answer that and there's hesitancy on that, and I see that most of the job description is hesitancy and they can't see how it's fulfilling what's most meaningful to them, I wouldn't hire them. I would tell them that you deserve to be in a career that's more inspiring than what I can offer you here. So it's not fair to me or you, so I say no. But if I find somebody that's got at least an 80% congruency or more, and I know how to make them even higher, then they are potential individuals. But they have to have a history of doing that. They have to show that they've been dedicated to that. They have to have expertise and know more about it than me. I don't know a lot about IT. So I have specialists that do IT. I learned a long time ago, there's technicians, managers, and visionaries. Visionaries make way more money than just technicians. So I don't want to be the technician. I want to delegate the technician. I don't want to be the manager. I want to delegate that. I want to be the visionary with an inspiring idea, with original ideas that contribute to the planet. So I made sure that I delegated all those things down below and got on with the thing that allowed the visual cortex and the executive center to run. Alan McKinsey in his book, The Time Trap, said the people that are in the highest layers are envisioning something, strategically planning something, delegating something, and staying focused on the vision. Those with the vision flourish. Those without the vision and go down and do things and lose their vision, then they end up perishing. So I just, you learn as you go, and you just end up realizing that this is just smarter to do it. But I became financially viable by that, not by getting money and then learning how to delegate. It was the other way around. It was the delegation that allowed me to do what I did most. I made a list of every single thing that I did in a day. I mean, for over a 3-month period, every single thing that I did in a day, from the time I woke up to the time I went to bed. And then I went right next to it in the next column after I listed this, and there was a lot listed. I didn't put down generalities like marketing. I put down making a telephone call, writing this thing note down, etc. Every detail. And I put a dollar, and I found out that 70% of what I was doing wasn't making any money and not doing anything that contributed to somebody's life that they would pay and put a value on. And I'm devaluing myself 70% of my time. And the thing that was actually most valuable was getting out and speaking in front of a group of people and engaging them in becoming patients. And the second most valuable thing was clinically doing high priority clinical work that I'd been highly specialized for. And everything else was to be delegated. And the next one was training those people on making sure that they were congruent with the long-term vision of the company. So once I delegated the rest and did those 3 things, my income skyrocketed. And I was freed from having to do it. And I felt like I was on top of the world instead of down where the world's on top of me doing all this stuff, which most people are trapped. And that's why they can't get out of the financial, constraints. So it doesn't cost to do it. It pays to invest in quality people that you would delegate to. But giving some people a job that they're not inspired to do it, that aren't really engaged in it and everything else, that's going to cost. But that's improper delegating and improper.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Just thank you on a personal level, because that really got the gears moving in my mind there of how to move this forward for myself. So I really appreciate it. I think, I'm very aware that you're 50 years into this amazing journey. So hearing from you 50 years down the line, this podcast is called Take Flight, right? It's about the leap of faith out of a life that doesn't align with them into something they're passionate about, into their thing, into what they want to do for their lives. What is their purpose, essentially? So if someone is at that crossroads now where they understand that the thing they're doing isn't what they should be doing or doesn't align with them and it's making them miserable, and the story we often hear, what should they do at that stage, that crossroad, when they finally realize and they've got this opportunity perhaps to take that next step, that leap of faith?
Well, I take all the shoulds out, because a should means that you're doing something that some outer authority is telling you need to do. You should do. You never should yourself in your own values. That's an interesting thing. So you never make a mistake in your own values. You only make a mistake when you compare your actions to somebody else's values you've injected. Freud called that the superego. The first superego comes from the mom, then the dad, then the preacher, then the teacher, then the social groups, and larger dynamics as you go through life. And as Kohlberg says, eventually you transcend it, hopefully in later life, but most people don't. They get trapped and they get stuck, and they're trapped living by got tos, have tos, must, shoulds, ought tos, supposed tos, and need tos. If you're even hearing that language in your head, you're not being authentic. That's a guarantee. I mean, I've been studying that for 45 years. When you're doing something you love to do, it's something you love doing. As Buffett says, tap dance to work. He's delegated everything else. He loves reading, and he loves looking at financials, and he loves making a decision on things. He doesn't like doing the other stuff, so he doesn't do it. And people say, well, that's because he's wealthy. No, that's how he got wealthy. He learned to do that at a young age. And those people have that reversed. But if somebody's starting out, the first thing I tell people to do is get clear about what you really value. So you can get it clear, because your identity revolves around your highest value. Let's say you meet a young girl who's 35 years old, has 3 children under the age of 5, and her highest values are children. If you ask her, who are you? If you ask an ontological question, who are you? She'll say, I'm a mother. Now, she may be married to a man, and let's say his highest value is entrepreneurship and running businesses. Even though he has 3 children, if you ask him, who are you? He won't say father, he'll say entrepreneur. Because your identity always revolves around what's highest on your value. So knowing what that is, so you can be clear about your identity and who you are and what you're committed to, your teleological purpose, the telos, is the highest value, as Aristotle said 2,325 years ago, 50 years ago. Literally 2,350 years ago, he said that the very highest value of an individual is their telos. It's the most meaningful, most purposeful, most chief aim, as Napoleon Hill would call it, the end in mind. It's the ultimate primary objective for a human being. Finding out what that is, to me, is the starting point. Then learning the art of prioritizing your day. I learned that from Mary Kay when I was about 30. Mary Kay Cosmetics, I was speaking for them. And I asked Mary Kay, what advice can you give a young guy who wants to travel the world and speak and inspire people? She said, every day, ask yourself, what are the highest priority actions you can do today that can help you fulfill your dream? And make sure that they're in actions for the day, not goals that take multiple days. Just little bite-sized incremental pieces that you do that day that you can get done, so you keep rewarding yourself by getting it done and not giving yourself goal overrun where you never really get completed and you're overwhelmed with goals. Just action steps for the day. So I wrote them on index cards, 3x5 index cards every single day. And as I wrote them out and I meditated, I got into a state of gratitude where you're most authentic, and then asked, what are the highest priority action steps right now in my awareness that I could do? And I wrote them out. And then I got after them and I stuck to those. And then I kept those in a box at the end of the day when they're checked off. If I finished them early, I would add one more. What's the highest priority now? Bill Gates, when they asked him a question, he said, every day I ask myself, what is the highest priority action I can do that can make the greatest difference and contribution to the world with the resources I have in the most efficient, effective manner today? That's a smart question to ask yourself every day, because you're gonna excel if you do that. So I kept records of those, and then at the end of a couple of years, I went back into there and I looked at what was the most common highest priorities, and I took the card and I wrote them out, I tossed the card, took the next card, and there was some duplicates. So I put line, took the next card, tossed that one out. The next one, there was another one that was the same one, and then a new one. And I put line, slash. And I looked at which one of the priorities kept being the highest priority of the priorities consistently. Teach, research, write, travel. I said, okay, I'm delegating everything else off my plate. It was exactly the same thing I found by 2 different methods. They led to the same thing. And you got to know yourself after a while. You knew what it is. So most people at first are afraid to admit, they're afraid to be themselves. You can jump out of building or jump off a bungee jump. You can do fire walking. You can do climbing ropes and jumping out of planes as a metaphor for courage. But those are insignificant compared to the courage of being yourself. That's the most courageous thing you can do in a world that wants you to be different, wants you to fit in. Having the courage to be yourself. And that starts with prioritization. A priori, as the philosophers used to say, which is the internal deductive calling that an individual has that comes out of their heart and expresses their path in life.
Wow, I love that. That's incredible. Thanks, John. And yeah, thank you on the shoulds. But I think that's important. I often catch myself projecting what Henry Thoreau said is that quiet life of desperation. I project that onto my definition of that, right, which was the corporate world, and me wanting to flee that and leap from that.
I'm working on 3 books right now, and one of the editors I had a meeting with the other day, and I said, I want to make sure that there's no imperative language in the books. If you put it in there, I'm going to tell you to take it out. There's no moral language in there, because that's a subordination to an idealism designed to create guilt in people for them to be easily controlled by religion and politics. And people don't realize that. Religion's in the guilt-producing control business, and so is politics. People don't get that. They don't realize that they're being told how to be a drone, not told how to be a leader. And so I make sure that all that language is out of there, and there's no things, there's always specifics. And he's going, well, this is new. I've never even thought about it. I said, well, I read some of your work, and you've got person that's incongruent, and you've got authoritative talking to people, which turns people off. If somebody comes up to you and said, you should buy my product, you go, who the hell are you? But if you engage in a sustainable, fair exchange where there's equanimity within you and equity between you and others, you have now the most powerful positioning to create a lasting legacy. So that's important. And I know you mentioned the word passion. Most people have never looked up the etymology of passion, but if you look up the etymology of passion, it comes from the root pati and passio, and in Latin it means to suffer. So I don't ever use the word passion. I use the word mission. An inspired mission was a little bit of a Christian overlay, was something that you felt called to do that was intrinsically driven from within, when the intrinsic drive is greater than extrinsic sources and forces. Because passion is basically the suffering, because when you're passionate, you're trying to avoid a pain and seek a pleasure from an amygdala response and the nucleus accumbens response and the striatum response and the subcortical area of the brain. But the executive response is the mission. That's where a bigger vision is. So I tell people, I'm not a man of passion. I'm a man on a mission, one with a vision and a message. Because a passion means ungoverned, uncontrolled behavior made out of impulses and instincts out of our amygdala, basically to avoid predator and seek prey. And it's a survival response. But it's been popular since 1984 when they came out with the book, The Passion for Excellence. The term in the lexicon changed, and that became the common wording that people used. But I'd rather go back to the original etymology and stick to true etymology on what the meaning originally was, because I think that most people have the idea that passion and mission are the same, and they're not. There's a big difference between a passion and a mission. A passion means you're controlled by a fantasy on the outside and trying to avoid a nightmare on the outside. And a mission is an intrinsic calling that has nothing to do with the external world. It's a calling inside you that you're here to do something. And the intrinsic values far exceed extrinsic values. We see when you infatuate.
That's amazing.
When you have infatuation with somebody, you're conscious of their upsides and unconscious of their downsides, and you minimize yourself to them. And then you inject their values and you try to be somebody you're not, which is futile. So anytime you have infatuations and mania for something, and you're out of control and you're drawn to something, you're blind to the downsides, and you're not really objective, you're subjectively biased as a survival mechanism to capture prey. And many people don't capture that, and they think that excitement is where it's at, but they're actually blind. You wouldn't want to go to and say, I'm going to go to Mars with excitement. You want to go there with thinking out and mitigating all the risk and make sure you have a real objective and think through your engineering and make sure you really think it through. You don't just go off there and say, I'm going to go off to Mars. I mean, Elon Musk has got the top engineers working on going to Mars, and lots of falls and blow-ups and explosions. And it's not just all fantasy land. And the same thing, if you resent something, you're conscious of the downside and unconscious of the upside. And now you're blind to the upside. And anytime you're seeing a division between conscious and unconscious, and you store that in the subconscious mind, impulses and instincts are going to run your life. And those are the definition of passion. Because now you're trying to get other people to live in your values, or you're trying to live in other people's values, which you can't sustain. It's an unsustainable drive that's extrinsic, instead of an intrinsic calling that's authentic to you, which nobody can distract you from. That's what I'm interested in, and helping people get that. Then they don't have to worry about motivation. I don't need motivation. You don't need motivation to do what you love doing. Not what's really the highest priority. You just spontaneously do it.
It's outstanding. It's outstanding. I mean, there's so many things I could ask off the back of that. I want to be respectful of your time. Are you okay for a few more minutes?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, just a few more.
Yeah, amazing. Okay. So there's something I just wanted to ask. This is probably another selfish question, really, but what I admire so much about you is that you haven't just learned from the best. You've then gone on to create your own models about the things you know to be true, right? The wisdom that you found. What would you, firstly, like just, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that and whether you see yourself like that as well. But also for someone like myself, who I see myself as a young teacher, I've learned a lot of things along the way through the hardships I've faced and the people I've worked with and the stuff I've achieved personally myself that I want to share and tell that story. What's that process of then recreating something like your values factor as an example? Like you then went on to build your own model. So you haven't just gone on to learn and then teach. You've built an entirely new model and then you've shared that. Like, what's that process like?
I asked, Paul Bragg gave me a statement. When Paul Bragg spoke that night, when I was 17, at the very last, he said, by the way, anybody that would like to join me at Fort Dersi in the mornings, I have classes each morning, and you can join me, and we have classes each morning. And we have fruits, and we do exercise, and we have fruit, and we have discussions. Well, I was 5:45 the next morning. I was hitchhiking to the other side of the island to be with him. And I spent 3 weeks with him learning as much as I could from this guy. And then finally he says, I'm going back to California, back to Mount Shasta and Santa Barbara area. And I thought, ooh, my mentor's disappearing. And when he was around, I was pretty inspired, but I was thinking, ooh, what's going to be like now that he's gone? And I finally had the courage to walk up to him. I was a little intimidated by him. Very vivacious, short little guy. And he said, I walked up to him and he said, Mr. Bragg, you said that whatever we decided that night in that Sunset Recreation Hall 3 weeks ago would become our destiny. And he said, that's right, young man. I said, well, I saw that I would overcome my learning problems, become a teacher and travel the world. And he said, well, then that's what it is, young man. I said, well, sir, I don't know how to read and I don't know how to speak properly. And I was stumbling as I was doing it. And he looked at me and he said, is that your only problem, son? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, that's not a problem. And I said, no, sir. And he says, I want you to say this little statement every single day to yourself and never miss a day the rest of your life. I said, what's that, sir? Say, I am a genius and I apply my wisdom. And I thought, what exactly is that? And he made me say it again and again and again until my eyes closed and I kind of got that. He says, say that and never miss a day for the rest of your life. I've never missed the day. Every single morning and multiple times of the day, that statement is there. Then when I moved back home and I asked my mom, what exactly is a genius? And she said, people like Albert Einstein and Da Vinci. I said, well, then get me whatever books by those people or about those people. I want to know about these people. And I got the first book, one by Vasari on Da Vinci, and I got this other book on Einstein on Brownian movement. And that had an influence on my life because he was talking about a hidden order in the chaos, which I've been in pursuit of all these years. And he said that I'm not a man of my family, I'm not a man of my community or city or state or nation, I'm a citizen of the world. And I wrote that down. I want to be a citizen of the world. I later added on top of that, the universe is my playground, the world is my home, every country is a room in the house, and every city is a platform to share my heart and soul. And that has been with me all these years. And I live on a ship called the world that goes to every country around that house, that advertises that every country is a room in the house. So what I say to myself has an impact on life. 2 years later, I was sitting in a library at Wharton, and I was tutoring some kids on mathematics. From not knowing how to read, 2 years later, I'm now tutoring on mathematics, and I heard this guy whisper. He said, that Demartini is a friggin' genius. And I got a tear in my eye when he said that because I thought, wow, that one statement is starting to make a difference. So that night I went to my room and I wrote a 23-page nonstop affirmation statement quote of how I wanted my life to be. I still have it. I could show it to you. And it's the way I dreamed my life to be. And I wrote it all out. Is 23 pages. It's now typed. At the time it's written, it's all typed. And I've edited it and refined it over the years, but it's still there. And it's now part of my posthumous biography of how I want to be seen 1,000 years from now. Because I realize that what you say to yourself has an impact. And if it's congruent with what you value, it just catapults and catalyzes an acceleration and an incremental momentum building impact on the thing you're here to create. Now, when you live congruently with your highest values and you have your thought, your vision, your internal dialogue, your external dialogue, your actions that are congruent with that, you're not subordinating to the world outside you, which is the thing that clouds you and makes you wonder if you can contribute something original. Original ideas and genius and creativity and innovation, as I presented at the United Nations one time, is about living authentically according to what your value is and allowing yourself to believe in yourself and originally create something out there in the world. But the second you subordinate to somebody, you will second guess yourself because you're not authentic. You're only rewarded with authenticity, only rewarded with originality when you're authentic. When tears of inspiration reveal to you something amazing, the KQ molecule or the DNA or the idea of traveling on a light beam, these things come in moments of authenticity. And that's why the values are so crucial for original thinking. And so once I learned that, and I started learning that by the time I was in my 20s, I let my tear of inspiration be my guide. Whenever I was reading and I get a tear of inspiration, I document what it is, what's the content of my mind. When I was presenting and I would get tears of inspiration, I would document the content. And it laid out, and I'd listen to music. When I get tear of inspiration, I take out the content of the lyrics. And I guarantee you, it lays out a very vivid idea of something original to contribute. It's amazing. So I'm a firm believer. Authenticity is the key to original thinking. How are you going to be original if you're living in subordination and shadows of other people? We're not here to live in the shadows of others. We're here to stand on the shoulders of giants.
What was the quote? When we are rewarded with originality when we're authentic.
That's it. Originality and original thinking. I could show you my cufflinks. I could go get my cufflinks. I have cufflinks. I'm not wearing the cufflinks today, but normally I have a cufflink that says love and wisdom. I have both silver and gold. And in the container, it says, in service to humanity, a man of original ideas that serve humanity. So that's the cufflinks. So I got reminded of that what my mission is, to create original ideas that serve human beings across the planet.
Amazing. It's been such a pleasure. John, I have one more question. You can just riff on this for 30 seconds or as much time as you have left. Just on tipping points in your career. Like, you've had such a fantastic career and The Secret is a book that was popularized that you were a part of. And I just wonder if you do view that as a tipping point or any other moment in your career which has allowed you to have the level of success that you've had.
There's many tipping points in my life. I think the teacher who told me I would never read, write, or communicate was an absolutely essential component. And I never got to thank her because I did it in my mind and got present with her and just said, thank you. Because if you hadn't have done that, I probably wouldn't have been on the journey later. So there was no mistake. Although I always say anything you can't say thank you for is baggage. Anything you can say thank you for is fuel. And all those events in your life that you thought were in the way are actually on the way. And wearing and constraining braces as a child, to wear braces on my arm and leg as a child from 1.5 to 4 made me want to be free and not be constrained. So I became a global citizen and traveled. Speech impediment made me a speaker. I told I would never amount to anything, made me, very wealthy. All those things are the voids that became the values. So that teacher had an impact on me. Almost everything in my life, I look back and I go, thank you. It's all part of that perfection. Then I met another teacher named Howard Hughes when I was 14. and I was hitchhiking to California, and I met him in El Paso, Texas, and he saw me being attacked and confronted by 3 cowboys on the street with my surfboard and my bandana headband. And he took me to a library, and he's the one that told me there's only 2 things they can never take away from you in your life, and that is your love and wisdom. Gain the wisdom of love and love of wisdom, and read books. And he put Plato and Aristotle underneath my hands and said, you learn how to read, young man. And he told me that, and he says, and gain the wisdom of love and the love of wisdom. So that's why I got those cufflinks, because of Howard Hughes. Then I met Timothy Leary, who said, we're here to not live in the constraints of society. Now, he was into LSD, which I call love, service, and dedication. I'm not a promoter of LSD today, but I certainly experienced it as a teenager. But he was the one that said, the universe, give yourself permission to travel in the universe and not live constrained. And he was a wild cat, but I got to smoke a joint with him when I was 14 and just listen to his crazy ideas. Then I got to meet great surfers, top surfers in the world, and hang out with them. And they were very dedicated individuals, and I learned a lot from that. And then I ended up meeting Paul Bragg at 17. And then at 23, I met this guy who had 6 PhDs. He was 35 years old, already had 6 PhDs. And I studied under this guy as much as I could about life and about the universe and he was an amazing guy. And then I had another mentor named Jim Parker about business and about vision. And I have had many mentors along the way that are catalytic points. And the time I failed the test, my mom, that was a mentorship. So I've had that. And then I've stood on the shoulders of thousands of great minds, so there are tipping points. It's a nonstop tipping point. That's all I can say. It's been a nonstop tipping point.
And it all sounds like it's people as well, which is lovely, the connections.
Yeah, it's either people in real life or people through great books. I was told by Tremendous Jones, Charlie Tremendous Jones, that you're the same individual tomorrow as you are today, except by the people you meet and the books that you read. And I have to say that was a very good thing. He was also another tipping point guy. And Robert Schuller, I met Robert Schuller, went to the Hour of Power Tower in Garden Grove, California, and hung out with him and spent 45 minutes with him. And I told him when I wrote my first book, I'm going to send it to him. And he inspired me to have a faith in the universe. He called it God, but a faith in the universe. And it says that because when you're really up against the wall and you don't know what to do, go inside and get past the stuff that you think is on the external world, the phenomenological world, and go into the Immanuel Kant's nominal world and access a knowing that's certain, and you will transcend the obstacles of mortal life. So I learned that from him. So I had mentors along the way that were pretty.
That's a good lesson. A good lesson. Listen, John, I could speak to you for hours. It's been an absolute privilege to converse with you and hear some of your incredible ideas. I'm going to have to listen to this intermittently as I grow over the years, and I'm sure I'll understand it in different ways as I go. And I'm just so thankful and grateful to you for the time. I have to come to one of your events in the future. I was in Austin, Texas just last week, and I was going to try and get to Houston and see you, but you're so busy around the world. So I will come to one of your events and see you face to face one day. I hope.
That would be lovely. I'd love to have you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be on your show. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share to the people you care about out there. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been an absolute privilege.
You have reached your destination.
Hey, it's Mark Whittle. Thanks so much for watching or listening. It's so great to have you a part of the Take Flight movement. Subscribe to the podcast on all platforms, video and audio, to be the first to see new episodes and new conversations with the greatest minds in the world. Follow me at markwhittle_TF on all social platforms, and visit takeflightworld.com to join our growing community of hustlers, performers, and go-getters. I can't wait to see you next time. Until then, stay positive, stay motivated, and of course, take flight.